My name is Sloane Mercer. I was 27 years old, exactly 1 week away from my wedding, when I learned that some people will call their cruelty concern as long as it sounds respectable at the dinner table. That night, I drove out to my parents' house in the suburbs thinking we were going to talk about seating charts, last-minute vendor updates, and whether the rehearsal dinner needed one more bottle of wine. Instead, the second dessert plates hit the table. The air shifted. My mother folded her hands like she was delivering a verdict, looked straight at me, and said the wedding was off. Not postponed, not discussed, not reconsidered. Cancelled. In her words, it had become a circus. My father did what he always did when he wanted to wound someone without taking full responsibility for it. He backed her up. He said marrying a man who worked for a nonprofit was reckless, like kindness was somehow a character flaw and purpose was something to be ashamed of. Then my younger sister leaned back in her chair with that smug little smile she wore whenever she thought she had the upper hand and told me I was useless, that I could not even pay for my own wedding. They expected me to break right there in front of them. They expected tears, begging, maybe even gratitude for their so-called honesty. What they got instead was silence. I picked up my purse, stood from the table, and said one word: understood. Then I walked out of that house without looking back. At the time, they thought they had just taught me a lesson. What they did not know was that 7 days later, those same people would be pounding on my apartment door, screaming my name like their lives depended on it. The drive back into Chicago felt longer than it actually was. Probably because I kept replaying every word in my head like my brain was trying to make it make sense. My mother's face had been calm when she said it, almost bored, like canceling her daughter's wedding was no more serious than returning a dress she no longer liked. My father had not looked angry either. He had looked satisfied. That was the part I could not shake. He had not spoken like a worried parent. He had spoken like a man correcting a bad investment. And my sister had laughed under her breath as if humiliating me in front of the family was the most entertaining part of her night. By the time I pulled into the garage beneath my building, I had stopped feeling shocked and started feeling something colder. Not rage, not yet. Clarity. My apartment was quiet when I stepped inside, the kind of quiet that makes every small sound feel louder. I set my keys down, kicked off my heels, and saw my phone light up with a text from Daniel asking if my parents had finally confirmed the final headcount for the weekend. I stared at the message for a few seconds, then typed back that I was handling it and that I loved him. That part was easy, because it was true. The hard part was knowing that while my family was sitting in that house attacking his job, he was probably finishing notes for a literacy fundraiser, helping kids who had been written off by people with more money than compassion. They called him unambitious because he did not chase wealth. I loved him because he never used people as stepping stones. I sat at my kitchen counter for less than a minute before I opened my laptop and called the one person who would still be awake. My operations director answered on the second ring. I asked her to pull every file tied to Willow Creek Conservatory and flag any request made in the last 48 hours under my family's names. She did not ask questions. She just said she would send everything in 10 minutes. While I waited, I walked over to the hallway mirror and looked at myself. My mascara was still intact. My hair was still in place. I did not look like someone whose wedding had just been torn apart at dinner. Maybe that was why they had always underestimated me. They thought pain had to be loud to be real. They thought if I was not screaming, I was weak. The files came through faster than promised. My mother had tried to cancel vendor access. My father had demanded partial refunds. My sister had even emailed one coordinator asking whether the couple would be embarrassed by a smaller setup since, in her words, the bride clearly could not afford elegance. I read every line once, then again, slower. They had not just insulted me at dinner. They had already been moving behind my back. That was when the last of the shock disappeared. I called back and gave 3 instructions. First, no refunds were to be issued without direct authorization from me. Second, no schedule changes were to be accepted from anyone outside my office. Third, every message from my family was to be documented and forwarded to legal if needed. My voice sounded steady even to me. After I hung up, I finally let myself sit there in the silence and feel what was left. It was not heartbreak. Not exactly. It was the terrible, clean understanding that the people who should have loved me most had only loved the version of me they thought they could control. They believed they had canceled my wedding that night. What they had really canceled was their last chance to stand beside me when it happened. The next few days settled into a strange routine, the kind that looks normal from the outside, but feels nothing like normal when you are living inside it. Every morning I woke up, showered, answered emails, and moved through final wedding details like I was following a script I had memorized years earlier. On paper, everything was still happening exactly as planned. The floral order was confirmed. The menu tasting notes were finalized. The string quartet had their timeline. The transportation schedule was locked in. The guest welcome boxes were ready to go. If anyone on the outside had looked at my calendar, they would have seen a bride in the final week before her wedding, busy but excited. What they would not have seen was how carefully I was separating that life from the one I had just walked out of. My mother called the next morning at 8:14. I let it ring. She called again at lunch, then again just before 6. By the third attempt, she left a voicemail that began in the soft, wounded tone she used whenever she wanted to rewrite history before anyone else could describe it accurately. She said we needed to talk like family. She said emotions had been high. She said I should not be dramatic over one difficult conversation. Not once did she apologize for canceling my wedding. Not once did she apologize for what they said about Daniel. My father tried a different approach. His text was short and sharp. "Call me immediately. We need to fix what you started." I stared at that message for a long moment because it told me everything I needed to know. In his version of the world, I was still somehow the one creating the problem. My sister was worse in a way only younger siblings with no real consequences can be. She posted a story that afternoon about people pretending to be classy while living above their means. No names, of course. She did not need one. She wanted me to see it. I did see it. Then I set my phone face down and went back to reviewing seating assignments. Every hour that passed made me calmer, and I think that was the part they were not prepared for. They thought silence meant confusion. They thought distance meant fear. In reality, I was working. 2 days after that dinner, I went out to Willow Creek Conservatory in person. The property always looked stunning in the late afternoon. All glass, stone, and old trees catching the light in a way that made everything feel softer than it was. I walked the grounds with my events lead and checked each detail myself. Ceremony chairs, reception layout, lighting design, backup weather plan, dessert display. I approved a small change to the greenery installation and added another candle wall near the dance floor. I upgraded the coffee service because Daniel loved good coffee and would never think to ask for something extra for himself. That was the kind of man he was. He spent his days helping children build futures they had every reason to doubt, and still my parents had managed to reduce him to a paycheck in a single sentence. That thought stayed with me longer than anything they had said about me. Late that afternoon, my operations director pulled me aside and quietly told me there had been more contact from my family. This time, they had escalated. My father demanded to know why the refund request had been denied. My mother asked to speak directly with senior ownership. My sister emailed again, claiming there must have been some administrative mistake because our family had authority over the event. Authority? That word almost made me laugh. I asked what response they had received. My director told me the team had kept it simple and professional. All contractual decisions required owner approval. No further changes would be made. That was when I felt the shift. Until then, my family thought they were punishing me. Now they were beginning to understand that something was not moving the way they expected. They still did not know exactly what, but they could feel control slipping. I should have felt triumphant. Instead, I mostly felt tired. Not because the plan was difficult, it was because the truth underneath all of this was so ugly. If Daniel had been a corporate lawyer with a 7-figure bonus, none of this would have happened. If I had shown up wearing labels they respected and driving a car they found impressive, they would have called the wedding tasteful instead of ridiculous. Their problem was never money. Their problem was that they believed worth should be visible, obvious, and easy for other people to envy. Daniel and I had built something quieter than that, and they mistook quiet for weakness. By the 6th day, the calls stopped sounding offended and started sounding desperate. My mother called twice without leaving a voicemail. My father emailed with the subject line, urgent. My sister sent a message asking why the venue kept mentioning ownership approval and whether I knew someone there. I read that one twice. Then I smiled for the first time all week, because that was the moment I knew they were no longer standing comfortably in their own version of the story. They were starting to look around in the dark for a door they could not find. And the next night, right when I was steaming the last of my wedding weekend outfits and trying to decide whether to tell Daniel everything before the rehearsal dinner, my doorbell exploded through the apartment like an alarm. Then came the pounding. Hard, fast, angry. And before I even reached the door, I already knew exactly who it was. At first, I thought it might have been one of my neighbors dealing with a delivery or someone in the building hitting the wrong unit. But then the pounding came again, louder this time, rattling the door hard enough to make the frame shake. Not a knock, not even close. This was the kind of pounding that came from people who believed urgency gave them permission to destroy whatever boundary was in front of them. Then I heard my name, my mother's voice, sharp and shrill through the wood. Then my father's, louder, angrier, demanding I open the door immediately. My sister was talking over both of them, her voice climbing into that breathless, panicked register she used when things stopped going her way. I stood frozen for half a second in the middle of my living room, one hand still holding the garment bag I had just zipped. The only light on in the apartment was the lamp near the sofa, and the whole place had that warm, quiet feeling I had been trying to protect all week. Then they pounded again, harder. I set the garment bag down carefully, walked to the door, and looked through the peephole. All 3 of them were there, exactly as I had imagined, and somehow worse. My mother's face was tight and red, her hair slightly out of place like they had left the house in a hurry. My father looked furious in the way men do when they realize money is no longer solving a problem fast enough for their liking. My sister had her phone in one hand and kept turning toward the hallway like she was worried other people might see them. That, more than anything, almost made me laugh. She had no problem humiliating me in private. Now she was suddenly embarrassed to look unhinged in public. My mother slammed her palm against the door again. "Sloan, open this right now." I took a slow breath, unlocked the deadbolt, and pulled the door open just enough to block the entrance with my body. "You need to leave," I said. My father took a step forward like he was going to push past me, then stopped when he realized I was not moving. "Don't start that," he snapped. "We've been calling you for days." I noticed. My mother's voice changed instantly, dropping into that wounded tone she used when anger failed. "Sweetheart, we need to talk." I looked at her for a moment, then at my father, then at my sister. "You're shouting outside my apartment at night. That doesn't look like talking." My sister threw up a hand. "Oh my God, can you not do this right now? We have an actual problem." There it was. Not we hurt you. Not we were wrong. A problem. Something had gone wrong for them, and they had come to my door because they finally believed I could fix it. I opened the door wider, stepped aside once and let them in only because I wanted this to happen on my terms, not in the hallway where they could perform outrage for an audience. My father walked in first like he still owned every room he entered. My mother followed, clutching her purse against her side. My sister came in last, looking around my apartment with quick, darting eyes, the same way she always did, measuring everything without understanding any of it. I closed the door behind them, turned the lock, and stayed standing while they hovered awkwardly in the middle of the living room. No one sat until I did. That seemed to bother my father most of all. "Well?" he said. "Well, what?" I asked. He stared at me like I was being intentionally difficult. The venue refused the refund. Not only that, they said no additional changes would be accepted, and apparently, they've flagged our names. Your mother has spent all day trying to get someone competent on the phone, and we keep getting the same answer. He paused, his jaw tightening. Owner approval required. My mother stepped in quickly. So we need you to explain what you told them. Why would you assume I told them anything? I asked. My sister let out a short, disbelieving laugh. Because this is obviously you. Who else would it be? The people who run the venue, maybe? Stop being cute, my father said. This isn't funny. He pulled a folded printout from inside his jacket and held it up in the air like evidence at trial. Do you have any idea how much money is tied up in this now? Do you understand what kind of mess this is turning into? I looked at the paper but did not reach for it. You told me the wedding was canceled. That was before, my mother said quickly. Before what? She opened her mouth, then closed it. My sister jumped in, impatient as ever. Before this got ridiculous. We thought we were shutting down something wasteful. We didn't agree to be robbed. I felt something cold and almost amused settle into place inside me. Robbed? Yes, robbed, my father barked. We put money into this event, and now suddenly some faceless executive at that venue thinks they can talk down to us and keep our deposit. They told me ownership had personally declined the request. He took a step closer. So I'm asking you one more time. What did you do? I could have answered then. I could have ended it in that exact moment. But something in me wanted to hear how far they would go if I gave them room. So I walked past them into the kitchen, picked up a glass, filled it with water, and took a sip while they stared at me like I had lost my mind. Do you want some? I asked. Sloane, my mother said through clenched teeth. This is serious. I know. Then act like it. I am. My sister folded her arms. You always do this. Do what? This calm little routine where you act above everything when you know you're the reason people are upset. I turned to look at her fully. That's interesting, coming from you. Her mouth tightened, but she said nothing. My father, already halfway past patience, slammed the printout onto my counter. Enough. This family is already humiliated over this wedding, and now we're being treated like fools by a venue we helped pay for. I am not letting this go any further. That sentence hung in the air for a beat, and there it was. Not concern. Not heartbreak. Humiliation. That was the nerve he kept coming back to. Not that he had hurt his daughter. Not that he had insulted the man she loved. What bothered him was being made to look powerless. My mother must have realized he had said too much because she rushed to soften it. Your father just means this has all become bigger than it needed to be. No, I said quietly. I think he meant exactly what he said. My sister shifted her weight and pointed toward the counter. Can we stop circling it and get to the point? Why is the venue acting like whoever owns that place answers to you? I looked at her, then at my mother, then at my father, and for the first time since they had arrived, none of them had anything else ready to say. The room went still. Outside, I could hear the faint hum of the elevator at the end of the hall. Inside, all I could hear was my own breathing and the soft click of the refrigerator motor turning on. My father straightened his shoulders. Yes, he said, slower now. That's exactly what we want to know. I set my glass down on the counter and let the silence stretch just long enough to make all three of them uncomfortable. Then I said, "You came all the way here pounding on my door because a venue told you no. So before we go any further, I think it's finally time we talk about who exactly has the right to say it." For the first time that night, none of them spoke. I grabbed my laptop from the coffee table, set it on the kitchen island, and turned the screen toward them. At first, they just stared. Then they saw the company dashboard, the ownership records, and Willow Creek Conservatory listed under Crestline Event Group. Finally, their eyes landed on my name. Founder, CEO, sole controlling owner, Sloan Mercer. My father's face changed first. "What is this?" he asked, but the anger was gone from his voice. "The answer to the question you've been screaming outside my door," I said. My mother leaned closer, then looked at me like she was waiting for me to laugh and say it was a joke. "No," she said quietly. "That can't be right." "It is," I said. I opened another file and showed them the property records and approval chain. My father stared at the screen, then at me. "You own the venue?" "Yes," I said. "And not just that one." The room went completely still. My mother sat down slowly. My sister looked stunned. My father looked like he had no idea what to do with himself. Then my mother asked the one question that told me she still didn't understand anything. "Why would you keep something like this from your family?" I looked at her and said, "Because every time I shared anything with this family, you turned it into something to rank, compare, or control." My father tried to push back, saying they were only trying to protect me. My mother said they were worried. My sister called me irresponsible. I didn't raise my voice. I just reminded them what they had actually done. They had called me useless. They had mocked Daniel's work. They had assumed they could cancel my wedding because they thought I had no power to stop them. Then I asked the only question that mattered. If I still lived the way you think I do, if I still drove my old car, and if Daniel still worked at Brightpath, would you be standing here apologizing right now? No one answered. My father looked down. My mother went quiet. My sister said nothing. That silence told me everything. My father finally said, "We can fix this. We're your family." "You were my family when it was convenient," I said. "You were not my family when it mattered." My mother started crying. My sister got angry and accused me of trying to make them look stupid. I looked at her and said, "I didn't make you look stupid. You did that yourselves." Then my father asked the question he actually cared about. "So the refund is gone?" "Yes," I said. "Those were the terms." "And the wedding?" "Still happening. On schedule, at Willow Creek." My mother looked up immediately. "Then we can still come." "No," I said. "You can't." She stared at me like she had been slapped. My father stepped forward, but I didn't move. "You cannot shut us out of your wedding," he said. "Watch me," I said. That ended it. I walked to the door and opened it. "The wedding will be beautiful," I said. "You just won't be in it." And standing there, with all three of them finally speechless, I realized something that mattered more than the money or the venue. For the first time in my life, they knew they could not control how my story ended. For a few seconds, none of them moved. My mother stood there crying. My father looked like he was trying to decide whether anger or pride would save him, and my sister kept glancing between me and the open door like she still expected someone to step in and hand control back to them. Nobody did. My father was the first to recover enough to speak. He told me I was overreacting, that I was being cruel, that families said terrible things sometimes and moved on. My mother tried a softer version of the same argument. She said I was emotional, exhausted, overwhelmed by the wedding, and that this was exactly why major decisions should never be made in the heat of the moment. It almost would have worked on the old version of me, the one they had trained to doubt herself every time she finally stood up straight. But I was too clear now, too awake, too done. I told them this was not a heat of the moment decision. The decision had been made the night they sat across from me, insulted the man I loved, and treated my future like a family asset they could buy, cancel, or manage. My sister rolled her eyes and muttered that I was being dramatic, but even she sounded weaker now. She did not have the same confidence she'd had at that dinner table. She had finally realized she was not mocking the powerless younger sister she thought she knew. She was standing in the apartment of a woman who had quietly built a life none of them had bothered to understand. When I picked up my phone and told building security I needed assistance with 3 unwanted guests, that was the moment the reality of it finally hit them. My mother's expression changed first. Panic replaced outrage. My father actually looked offended, as if I had broken some unspoken rule by refusing to let him keep shouting in my home. My sister snapped, asking whether I was seriously having them escorted out like strangers. I looked at her and said, "You started treating me like a stranger the second you decided respect depended on money." That shut her up. Security arrived less than 3 minutes later, polite but firm, and I did not have to raise my voice once. My father tried one last time, telling me I would regret this, that no wedding photo would make up for losing my family. I told him a wedding photo with people who despised my choices would have been the real regret. My mother was still crying when they walked into the hallway. My sister kept her head down. My father turned back right before the elevator doors opened, but whatever he had planned to say died on his face when he realized I was not wavering. Then the doors closed, and just like that, the silence came back. I locked the door, stood in the middle of my apartment, and let out the breath I had been holding for what felt like an entire week. I should have felt triumphant. Instead, I felt tired, not weak, not guilty. Just tired in the way you get when the truth finally stops fighting to be recognized and settles into the room for good. I sat down on the edge of my sofa and stared at my phone for almost a full minute before calling Daniel. When he answered, his voice was warm and familiar, and for the first time all week I felt my control slip just a little. I asked if he could come over. He said yes before I even finished the sentence. He was at my apartment 20 minutes later, still wearing the same navy jacket he'd had on earlier that day at a donor meeting, still carrying the quiet steadiness that had always made me feel safe. The second he saw my face, he stopped smiling. He asked what happened, and this time I told him everything. Not the edited version, not the manageable version, everything. I told him about the dinner. I told him exactly what my parents said about his work. I told him what Chloe said about me. I told him they tried to cancel the wedding behind my back. I told him they showed up pounding on my door because they had just realized the venue they were trying to control belonged to me. He listened without interrupting, which somehow made the whole thing harder and easier at the same time. When I finally finished, the room went quiet. He looked down for a second, then back at me, and the first thing he said was not about the venue or the money or the fact that I had kept a major part of my business life private. He said, "I'm sorry you had to sit through that alone." That was Daniel. Even in a moment that could have been about betrayal or shock or pride, he went straight to the wound. I told him I was sorry I had not told him sooner about Crestline, about Willow Creek, about how much I had hidden out of habit and self-protection. He sat beside me, took my hand, and said, "I never needed your money. I just needed the truth." It hurt because it was fair. I nodded and told him he deserved that from me. I told him I had spent years keeping parts of myself small because I never wanted to be loved for the wrong reasons, and somewhere along the way, secrecy had started to feel safer than honesty. He squeezed my hand and said he understood, but that marriage could not be built on edited versions of each other, even when the editing came from fear. We talked for over an hour after that, more openly than we ever had before. By the time we were done, I did not just feel forgiven. I felt known. Really known. The next morning, the wedding weekend began. Willow Creek Conservatory looked exactly the way I had imagined it in the months leading up to that day, but somehow even better. The white florals softened the stone pathways. The glass walls caught the afternoon light and turned it warm. The candles inside the reception space glowed low and golden against the greenery, and the whole place felt elegant without trying too hard, which was always what I wanted. Friends arrived. Daniel's family arrived. The people who genuinely loved us filled the space with the kind of energy no amount of money could manufacture. No one was there to judge. No one was there to calculate what things cost. No one was there to decide whether Daniel's career made him worthy of standing at the altar. They were just there because they loved us, and that changed everything. When I walked down the aisle, I did not think about my parents. I did not think about the deposit, the screaming, or the look on my father's face when he realized he had lost control. I thought about Daniel waiting for me at the end of that aisle with tears in his eyes and a smile he was trying unsuccessfully to hold steady. I thought about the fact that every ugly thing that happened that week had stripped away the last illusion I had about who belonged in my life and why. By the time we said our vows, I no longer felt like someone recovering from humiliation. I felt like someone stepping cleanly into her own life. The reception was everything my family claimed it never could be. Beautiful, warm, intimate, joyful. Daniel and I danced under soft lights strung through the conservatory ceiling. People laughed through dinner, cried during the toasts, and stayed late because no one wanted the night to end. And for the first time in a very long time, I was surrounded only by people whose love did not come with a price tag attached. My family thought they could still appear whenever they wanted and reclaim a place in the story because they shared my last name. But as I stood there that night with my husband's hand around mine, I understood something with absolute certainty. They had not just missed my wedding, they had lost the privilege of being part of the life that came after it. 6 months after the wedding, my mother sent the first real apology I had ever received from her. My father followed with a handwritten letter admitting he had spent most of his life judging people by status, money, and appearances, and that he had been wrong about Daniel. Chloe sent 2 short messages too, but they felt more uncomfortable than sincere. I read all of it, and for the first time in my life, I did not rush to make anyone feel better. Daniel and I moved forward. We bought a small house near the lake, built a quiet life together, and left that chaos behind us. He stayed at Bright Path, still doing work my family once mocked, and every day I respected him more for it. I also stopped making myself smaller just to keep insecure people comfortable. In the end, the wedding happened exactly the way it was meant to. It was beautiful, peaceful, and full of people who truly loved us. My family missed it, and that was the consequence of their choices. I eventually replied to my parents with one clear message. I accepted their apology, but trust would not be rebuilt overnight. If they wanted any place in my life again, it would have to be earned with honesty, accountability, and respect. Whether they can do that is still their responsibility, not mine. Looking back, I do not feel victory. I feel relief. Relief that the truth came out before I carried those people into my marriage. Relief that Daniel and I started our life on honesty instead of appearances. And relief that I finally learned the difference between love and control. That is the real ending of this story. My family lost the right to decide my worth. Daniel and I gained the life we actually wanted, and I walked away with something far more valuable than revenge. I walked away with peace. At Revenge Argonne, our team is committed to creating meaningful and engaging fictional stories that entertain while sharing positive lessons with viewers. Every story on this channel is made for educational purposes, with the goal of delivering thoughtful messages, valuable insights, and life lessons through compelling storytelling. This script carries an important educational value by showing that a person's worth should never be judged by money, status, or job title. It teaches viewers the importance of self-respect, healthy boundaries, and choosing relationships built on honesty and kindness. Most importantly, it reminds us that true love and family support should be unconditional, not based on personal gain.